Hey, welcome to another episode of Food, Nutrition, and Wellness with Dr. Dan Remley. Today, he's going to be talking about taking charge of diabetes. So stay tuned. And welcome to another episode of Food, Nutrition, and Wellness with Dr. Dan Remley. Today he's going to be talking about taking charge of diabetes. Dan, it's always a pleasure being involved with your program. I find your program to be very informative about various different wellness issues. You have a lot of information about diabetes, taking charge of diabetes, understanding what diabetes is and how it affects our health.
I just wanted to take a moment and talk about the science and symptoms of diabetes so hopefully if you have diabetes or you're concerned about diabetes, this hopefully will be helpful to you.
Hi, I'm Joan London. Diabetes is affecting more and more of us every day. Family members, friends, maybe even you. More than 30 million Americans are living with diabetes, and about 1 in 4 of them don't even know it yet. In fact, many of us don't even fully understand what diabetes is or how to know if we're at risk. So to help us, I am joined by Dr. Ann Albright, Director of the CDC's Division of Diabetes Translation. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Joan.
What's the basic definition of diabetes?
Well, there are 2 major forms of diabetes. Type 1 is a disease in which the body no longer is able to make enough insulin. And those who have type 1 diabetes must take insulin to survive. In type 2 diabetes, it's a disease in which the insulin is not acting properly. People are not sensitive enough to their insulin, and so they may be on insulin. They may also be treated with pills, and they may certainly and must eat healthy and be active. It's a key component of treating type 2 diabetes.
How do you know if you even have it?
If you are urinating a lot, if you are losing a rapid amount of weight, if you are getting some infections that don't heal. The issue is not everybody experiences those symptoms, and those who do may not necessarily think it's something that they have to get checked out or that they certainly think are related to diabetes.
And what are the risk factors?
That is something you really should be paying attention to for type 2 diabetes. The risk factors are if you're over the age of 45, if you are not as physically active, you're not getting enough physical activity, if you're overweight or obese, and if you're a member of a high-risk ethnic group, African American, Hispanic, Latino, American Indian, Asian, Pacific Islander, if you're a woman that had gestational diabetes or a baby weighing more than 9 pounds. All of those things are risk factors.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen.
And for more information, you can log on to cdc.gov/diabetestv. We'll see you next time. I'm Joan London.
Sponsored by NACDD with support from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Visit cdc.gov/diabetestv.
So that video kind of summarizes what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about some current statistics in the U.S., the different types of diabetes, some signs of diabetes, risk factors of diabetes, some of the complications, helping you become aware of diabetes self-care behavior. So if you're diagnosed, then what can you do? It's extremely costly nationwide. So nationwide, 34 million Americans, that's about 10% of the population lives with diabetes. It's the 7th leading cause of death in the United States. And there's about 1.5 million people diagnosed with diabetes every year. The other type of diabetes is called prediabetes. And in 2015, there were about 88 million Americans ages 18 or older that lived with prediabetes. So diabetes costs Ohio about $10,000 per person. And that includes healthcare costs, but also indirect healthcare costs. So if you're too sick to go to work, or you lose your job, or because you have a disability. So it's extremely, extremely costly. The estimated total cost is $3.4 million And for men, it's about 1.9 million. For females, about 1.4 million. Estimated 12 billion a year, and about 1.3 million have diabetes. And so a lot of people that have diabetes, almost about a third actually have diabetes but don't actually know it. And diabetes is when you have an A1C of 6.5 or greater, or a fasting blood glucose greater than 126. And actually about 3 million people have what we call pre-diabetes. And this is where diabetes, the A1C, which is, I forgot to mention this, it's like your average blood sugar over a 3-month period. It's about 5.7. And then the fasting blood glucose is between 100 to 126. And so every year, about 70,000 people in our state are diagnosed with diabetes. You know, what's driving this epidemic? Well, people are living longer. And so the longer that you live, the higher your risk of developing diabetes. And I've heard the doctors say if you live long enough, you're going to get diabetes. But we also, many of us have inactive lifestyles, so we're not meeting the recommendations for physical activity, which is about 150 minutes a week of moderate activity. So that's any type of activity where you're up and moving around, getting your heart rate, and getting your breathing up. So inactive lifestyles are a major contributor. And of course, you know, many of us don't follow the dietary recommendations. So we're not getting enough fruits and vegetables. We're eating a lot of heavily processed food that have a lot of added sugar and fat and sodium and that type of thing. And then our obesity rates are rising. So about 2/3 of all Americans and probably all Ohioans are considered overweight. There's different types of diabetes. Type 1 is where the pancreas makes little or no insulin. And so most people are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when they're younger. And so this is also known as juvenile diabetes. And then type 2 is also known as adult onset. And so this is where the body may be producing insulin, but the insulin just isn't working very well. And eventually, because of that, your body can quit making the insulin. And then there's gestational diabetes. And so this develops during pregnancy. And so if you have a baby that's over 9 pounds too, you're at risk for diabetes. And so all these forms of diabetes are similar in the fact that they raise blood sugar. And your body does not metabolize carbohydrates. And so we have elevated blood sugar, which causes a lot of problems. So these are some signs of diabetes. And so if you're experiencing any of these symptoms, you should probably go in and get checked. So if you're going to the bathroom a lot, if you're often thirsty, if you experience rapid weight loss, if you're tired all the time, if you have any skin infections or you have blurry vision, these are all some symptoms of diabetes. May not be diabetes, but the point is that you really need to go get checked out.
Can you experience one or all of them?
That's a good question. Yeah, it could be one, but it could be all of them. It just depends on, you know, how severe it is, and everybody's a little different. So these are some risk factors for diabetes. If you're overweight or have obesity, if you're 45 or older, if you have a parent, brother, or sister with type 2 diabetes, if you're physically active less than 3 times a week, if you had gestational diabetes or diabetes during pregnancy, a lot of times that might clear up, but you may develop it again. Or if you've given birth to a baby who weighed more than 9 pounds. If you're African American, Hispanic, Latino, American Indian, Alaska, a Native, Pacific Islander, or an Asian American, that also puts you at risk.
Why are they more susceptible to diabetes?
Yeah, there are some genetic dispositions put you at greater risk, kind of the genetically how you metabolize food, and it's kind of complex. So I'm not an expert on that, but again, these groups also have a lot of those other risk factors that tend to be, overweight. The obesity is higher in these groups typically than in other populations, and also you can look at behaviors like nutrition and lack of physical activity too, which tend to be more prevalent in some of these groups. So there's a genetic component to it, but there's also lifestyle issues as well. So prediabetes is sort of, you don't quite have it yet, but you're progressing that way. And it can be reversed if you can lose a little bit of your body weight. But you really want to get your A1C, which again is that average blood sugar over a 3-month span. You want to get it below 5.7. So if you're diagnosed with prediabetes, that's sort of like that's the flashing warning sign that you really need to start taking charge of your behaviors. Try to eat healthier, get more physical activity, try to get your weight down a little bit. You don't have to, lose 30, 40 pounds, but just, take off 5, 10 pounds. That can go a long way. And the health behaviors are really important as well. Diabetes is extremely serious disease. It can cause blindness. It's actually the #1 cause of blindness in the United States. But there's also a condition called neuropathy. So people that don't manage have uncontrolled diabetes will develop kind of tingling in their extremities, like their fingers and their toes. I've never had it. I have type 1, but I know people that have had it, and they say that it's kind of feels like bee stings, maybe in the morning or at night. And another problem with neuropathy is that you kind of lose sensation. So you may have like a wound in your foot and you don't realize it, so it can fester and it can become infected. And so sometimes people with uncontrolled diabetes that don't take care of their feet may have to have an amputation. So that can be a serious complication. There's also kidney disease, and so the kidneys can become leaky. And so sometimes if diabetes is not managed well, people might have to go on dialysis because of the kidney disease. And finally, this is probably the most prevalent complication, is cardiovascular problems. So people are at risk for heart disease, strokes, and then high blood pressure. So that's why people with diabetes not only have to watch their sugar intake, but they really need to be careful about sodium as well. So an overall healthy diet will be a little bit lower in carbohydrate, but also much lower in sodium. That's really what we want. That's really should be a major goal of any nutritional intervention. So diabetes is really a balancing act between 3 things. When you're physically active, that's going to lower your blood sugar, and also a lot of medications like insulin and pills and that type of thing. The medications will also lower your blood sugar. Meals will bring it up. So you want to balance the meals with your activity and your medications. And your blood glucose testing and your A1C test, that gives you an idea of how well you're in balance. So if your blood sugars are high, that means you're eating too much and perhaps you're not as active, or you need to make some adjustments in your medicines to get those blood sugars down. There are many self-care behaviors besides healthy eating and being active. The monitoring is really very important. The medication is important. But also sometimes we have to solve problems. And so, for example, my blood sugars were running higher after dinner. And so one thing that I decided to do was to take walks after dinner, and that helped bring down the blood sugars. But also reducing the risk. And so, if you're a smoker, it's probably a good thing to quit smoking, because as we saw earlier, people with diabetes have higher rates of heart disease. And also, a lot of people with diabetes have emotional problems. It's almost like you kind of have a lot of people go through a grieving process when they're first diagnosed with diabetes, just because they have to give up, a lot of things they're used to. Like maybe they're used to eating whatever foods they want, whenever they want. And it's not like we have to eliminate foods, but we have to cut back on the servings or the portion sizes sometimes. But it does mean that we have to change things that we're used to doing, and that can be hard for people. So a lot of people that are first diagnosed, they might reach out to like a social support group or take a class, and that helps people cope with diabetes. Typically, we talked a little bit about nutrition, but this is a healthy diabetes plate. So the idea here is that You want to have a balance of protein and vegetables and starches, and really go heavy on the non-starchy vegetables. So this includes like carrots and lettuce and things like broccoli. That should make up about half your plate. And so your starches should be about a quarter of your plate. We don't need a whole lot of starches. And then meat should also be about a quarter. And this is a health. And then fruit, maybe a serving of fruit and some milk. And so the more food groups that are represented on your plate, the healthier your meal is typically. And we really want to be careful about sodium and too many sweets and things like that. We want to limit those types of things.
Just out of curiosity, Dan, gluten. There is a major concern about gluten in products. Does that affect diabetes?
No, the gluten becomes an issue if you have like a celiac disease. And that's where you have to watch your foods that have gluten. Some people have allergies, but it shouldn't be a concern if you're somebody who has diabetes. With diabetes, one of the major goals should be to really try to make about half your grain choices whole grains, because you get more fiber that way. And fiber is really important in diabetes too. So fiber is found in things like fruits and vegetables and whole grains, but it's very helpful for blood sugar control because it can prevent those spikes in your blood sugars after you eat. And so the more fiber that we have in our diets, the better. And so we want to try to get about 5.5 cups of fruits and vegetables every day. Most people don't meet that goal at all. So that's something that we all can work on. So portion sizes versus serving sizes. Portion is kind of what you eat, and a serving is like sort of like a recommended amount. So here in this, and you learn about serving sizes by looking at food labels. So you can see the food label here. A serving size is 1 cup, but there's 4 cups in the package. And so if you eat the whole package, you're going to get 4 servings. So you should probably want to stick to generally 1 serving, especially if you're thinking about cookies, cakes, chips, candies, those products that have a lot of added sugar. You really want to pay attention to those serving sizes. I had a problem with chips, potato chips. I love potato chips. If I eat them out of the bag, it's really easy to lose track of, about how many chips I actually eat, and how many calories and how many carbohydrates I've just consumed. And so the dietitian really tried to get me to count the chips out, count the serving out, put it into a bowl, and just eat the chips right out of the bowl. So that gives me better control of my servings.
What about popcorn? Popcorn is a really good snack.
Yeah, popcorn can be very healthy. It's a whole grain, so you get some fiber and you get some some vitamins and minerals and that type of thing. But it does have carbohydrate. It can be loaded with, depending on how you like your popcorn. As you know, if you go to the movie theater, you're going to get a lot of fat and salt and things like that. So, but it can be very healthy. But again, even if you have diabetes, you really have to think about it. Maybe a serving. Just keep track of. Have a plan for every snack and every meal. And that's why you really want to go in and talk to a licensed dietitian, and she can kind of help you think about your meals and help you have a plan for every meal. It's kind of like having a budget. If you're on a budget, a daily budget, and try to stick to that budget. That's the same idea with nutrition. So some people will have carbohydrate budgets. So they're allowed so many carbohydrates for breakfast, and then so many carbohydrates for lunch, and then so many carbohydrates for dinner. And they have to think about, okay, what is a serving? How many carbohydrates are in that serving? And that tells me how many servings I can have. Physical activity is really, really important. It's important for everybody, but especially if you have diabetes. It raises your heart rate, improves your blood circulation. It decreases your risk for heart disease. It reduces stress, and it lowers your blood sugar and A1C. And so these are things that can help we talked about all the problems with diabetes. And so not only is it helping your your body, it's also helping your mind as well. And so I think it's one of the most important behaviors that we can practice if we have diabetes. But in general, even if we're healthy, we should really try to ramp up our physical activity as much as we can. So people that walked, for example, more often were less likely to develop heart disease. And even vigorous, including in some vigorous activity, can also be helpful for preventing heart disease. There's lots of research supporting the benefits of physical activity. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to join a gym. You don't have to do anything too extreme. You don't have to run marathons. It can be as simple as gardening, going out and working in your yard, just getting up and moving. It can be dancing. It can be doing housework. And it should be 30 to 60 minutes, at least 5 days a week. And it's any type of activity, as I said before. It gets your heart rate, gets your breathing up. But it doesn't have to be real fancy. I think it's good, too, to work in some what we call anaerobic activity, where you're lifting weights. You might not get your heart rate up very much, but if you can get some soup cans, or you can get some small weights and just do some weights, 3 to 4 times a week for 20 minutes, that builds your muscle mass, and that really helps your metabolism out as well. So that can be included in this. So if you go to the doctor and you find out that you have diabetes, here's some recommendations. You really want to find a doctor and healthcare team who you feel very comfortable with, that you don't feel like you're going to be judged. That's the worst thing. You really want to be upfront with your doctor and be very honest about yourself and your behaviors. Sometimes when I go to the doctor, I'm sort of ashamed to admit that maybe I wasn't as active as I should be, or maybe I'm drinking too much alcohol. But these are things your doctor needs to know so that they can sort of meet you where you're at and help you work through some things, maybe set some realistic goals for yourself. But you really want to be comfortable, because your doctor and your healthcare team, they're kind of like your partners in this. They are there to meet you where you're at and give you ideas for practicing those self-care behaviors. And so if you're not comfortable talking to your doctor and being honest with your doctor, you probably need a new doctor. You really want to work with them to set some goals and set some. So if you're not active, you may want to try to be more physically active, and maybe they can help you with some ideas. Healthy eating is also very important. So meeting with a dietitian, having that dietitian, work with you to set up meal plans for the day that will help you, manage those blood sugars. But also you want to have a supportive family and community. Find those sources of support in your life. And so, for some people, other family members aren't very supportive. So maybe the other family members aren't really living healthy lives. They're not bringing in healthy foods, for example. And, so they need to be supportive. In other cases, we see that one spouse is trying to control the other spouse. And so that's important. There's some communication issues there. But going out in the community and finding those support classes, those diabetes education classes. OSU Extension offers a program called Dining with Diabetes throughout the state. And so call your local extension office to see if that's offered. There's also a diabetes prevention program that's offered by the YMCA. So if you're diagnosed with prediabetes, you can call the YMCA to see if there's a diabetes prevention program. There's other diabetes self-management programs, too, that are offered throughout Ohio, and the Council on Aging offers these programs. So, there's lots of opportunities to learn more about your diabetes. I've been living with diabetes for 30 years now, and there's still, every time I go to a class, I learn more and more. So learning is a lifelong process. So that's, OSU Extension does offer an online class. It's called Beyond the Kitchen. And here's the link to enroll for that class. And we focus on helping you make healthier choices at the grocery store, but also eating out. And there's quizzes and lots of good resources for you. There's videos, virtual shopping tours, and that type of thing. And I think that's all I have. Do you have any questions, or can I clear up anything?
How can we get in touch with you, Dan?
Yeah, so my phone number, I'm at OSU South Centers, but I've been working at home due to the pandemic in my basement, like a lot of people. So my email is remley.4, but it's remley.4@osu.edu. And my cell number is 740-600-2105.
And what we'll do is we'll put that on the screen. Dan, I always learn a great deal when it comes to different kinds of foods and nutrition and how it interacts with the body. As you said, we sort of come complacent with our eating styles and don't realize how it affects our health.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of I think as you get older, it's hard to. I think it gets harder to break habits, and that's what's really hard. And that's why I said when diabetes can be a very stressful situation for a lot of people, stressful life event, really. And so get help that you need, and it might not be from your doctor necessarily, but it could be a counselor, or some of those services are available as well.
Hey, we're talking with Dr. Dan Remley. Dr. Dan Remley is a field specialist with the Ohio State University Extension Program in Food, Nutrition, and Wellness. Dan, it's always a pleasure talking with you, and look forward to our next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.